Scory. Welcome to the Banana Republican podcast. De-Vaxxing of America. Pfizer, Pfizer around and is finding out. RFK Jr. as lead of the Health and Human Services is really putting the screws to Big Pharma, and quite frankly, it's about time. If you look at Big Pharma's influence on the country, it's staggering. Something like 1 in 4 ads are pharmaceutical ads. If you watch terrestrial TV, which a lot of people don't anymore, but if you do, you're going to see ads for medicines for diseases which I had no idea existed. I don't live under a rock or a cave, but my sense is that there's so many diseases out there that are just created, probably by other vaccines or other medications, that it's just the pharmaceuticals run the news agencies. They're the ones advertising on them, and they're the ones selling and making huge profits. Now, it looks like it's time to de-vax America for a variety of reasons. One, the vaccines were sold, especially the COVID vaccine, but there's other aspects to it. I'm not a medical doctor. Let me just get that out there. But you can watch medical doctors talk about it in Congress, on their YouTube channels. You can watch and discern people like Dr. Malone, who was part of the creation, part of the team that made mRNA vaccines. Dr. McCullough, other people all over the place, in Europe, in the US, in Asia. So there's plenty of material out there. Let me just get that out of the way. So I'm not a medical doctor, but I'm looking at things like, why was the vaccine sold so heavily, mandated in many places, although ironically not mandated in Pfizer, not mandated in Congress, but was certainly mandated at the state level in terms of employment, in terms of corporate level, in terms of all kinds of places where you had to get the vaccine or you wouldn't have a job. So there's this tremendous, I don't know, deeply ingrained and embedded control and influence over American society that Big Pharma has, and it's got to stop. It has to stop. Here's the thing. Who owns the airwaves? Like I said, it's Big Pharma. They're the ones covering the news shows. You can go on YouTube and see all these clips of the news shows brought to you by pharmacists, brought to you by Pfizer, brought to you by whomever, all these different companies that are really, as a handful of them, and they're making these drugs. And the vaccine schedules for kids are at monstrous levels. And RFK Jr. is saying, enough, enough. And now he spent 30 or 40 years as an attorney suing the pharmaceutical companies. And he won an awful lot, and get an awful lot of lawsuits. In fact, you can look it up. It's something like $2 or $3 billion that Pharma has paid. Pfizer. Pfizer has paid in fines, in court losses. Over $2 billion. That's before COVID. Now let's talk about the vaccine just for a second. It was sold to Americans, mandated on many Americans, millions and millions of us, as both safe and effective, and will stop the spread, and 14 days, flatten the curve, 6 feet away and wear your mask, and don't wear your mask and wear 2 masks. We saw all that stuff. We all lived through it. Okay, all that went on, and the fact is that the mRNA typically makes you sicker. It's blood clots, myocarditis, other tumors, fast advancing cancers, which, by the way, in 2021, Dr. Robert Malone gave a talk on YouTube. I don't know if it's still around, but he talked about that. He talked about exactly those symptoms happening. And within 5 or 6 years, they found out that the animals they tested the mRNA vaccines on, they were all dead. And I'll come back to that in just a little bit. But the fact is that Big Pharma, Pfizer included, they lie habitually. If they didn't lie habitually, they wouldn't be paying billions of dollars in court fees and in awards and in damages, right? So the fact matters is that, 2006 in Nigeria, the Pfizer folks tried a drug in Nigeria on some kind of disease. I can't remember what it was, but the drug was called Trayvon. Now, they gave it to many people there in this one state of Nigeria. It disfigured people, deformed them, crippled them, made their legs shrink, killed 11 kids or so. And get this, they gave the drug to these people in Nigeria. The drug hadn't even been approved by the FDA. So that goes well before the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. That's what we're talking about. And in fact, in 2024, it was revealed that in the run up to the pandemic, and perhaps afterward, I have to check the report, $1.06 billion was given to the New England Journal of Medicine, the Lancet, Journal of American Medical Association, all the top reviewers of pharmaceuticals. They received over $1 billion by who? Big Pharma. So, the trust the science is corrupt because science is people, and people can be bought. We all know that. Now, here's the thing: we look at what's going on after the COVID, the effect of the vaccine, and excess deaths. And if you look at Dr. John Campbell, he's got a YouTube channel. He goes over excess deaths from 21, 22, 23, 24. The ones in 25 aren't yet available, but we have those years in the heavily vaxxed nations, the US, Canada, the UK, New Zealand, Australia, Ireland. The excess deaths year after year after year for 5 years running have run between 10 and 20%. In other words, that's millions of people who died who wouldn't ordinarily statistically die. Now, the counter to that is nations in Eastern Europe, which were not heavily vaccinated, like Russia, Romania, Armenia, Georgia, Tajikistan, they all had lower than average or expected deaths. Fewer people died than they should have, than would be expected. What does that tell you? Now, you may say correlation, and Dr. John Campbell makes this point. Correlation does not equal causation. Agreed. But it sure as hell points you in a direction to look, doesn't it? And that's what we're talking about. So Taiwan had high excess death rates between 10 and 20%. Denmark. So I've given you probably 6 or 8 of them, and they all have higher than normal excess deaths between 10 and 20%. And that's the highly vaccinated nations up through 2024. So that's brutal. At the same time, before Congress, Dr. McCullough testified and said, look, he headed a study group which did, I don't know, tens, dozens, hundreds of autopsies on vaccinated folks, people who had had the COVID vaccine. They had subsequently passed away. And they did these autopsies on the causes of death. And these are his words, not mine. His study revealed that 73.9, call it 74, you could probably call it 3 out of 4. 3 out of 4 of the post-COVID vaccine deaths were caused by the vaccine. Trust the science? Hardly. So should America be de-vaxxed? Absolutely. Should America be looking into just what the hell is going on with our medical system? Absolutely. Should the U.S. go after Pfizer, go after whomever else, AstraZeneca or Merck or whoever it might be, whoever pushed these things, whoever makes these things, they should go after them. Absolutely. I saw, as an aside, I saw this Vietnamese fellow talking about how they had no vaccines, childhood vaccines, right, in Vietnam, or up until around 1990 or 2000, say 25, 30 years ago. And there was no autism. Autism didn't exist. And now autism is a big deal in Vietnam. Okay? Autism just appeared. So is that causality necessarily? Nope. But it certainly is correlation. And correlation certainly gives you a good place to start looking. And that's the thing, is that people say correlation doesn't cause causality, but the reality is that it often confirms that it is causality. And here's another thing, is that Bobby Kennedy Jr. is doing something that's very, very dangerous. In other words, I would compare it to the U.S. pulling out of Vietnam and not funding the war under Jack Kennedy. Well, that threatened the profits of huge military armament companies in the U.S. All kinds of things. You can't overstate it. Helicopters, boats, missiles, guns, landmines, whatever else. That whole thing. And I'm not going to get into the Vietnam War. That's ancient history. But the idea that another Kennedy would threaten the pharmaceutical industry, which, by the way, is probably on par with the defense industry. I think the defense spending in the U.S. is, I don't know, 5 or 6%. Pharmaceutical spending is probably around 9%, or at least their costs in terms of what the spend is, right, on GDP. Or maybe just medical expenditures, which are really, really high anyway. But the point being is that pharmaceutical spending has increased from 13.6% in 2022 to 2023, hitting $722.5 billion total. And that's from the American Journal of Health System Pharmacy in 2024. So 2/3 of all pharmaceuticals profits come from the U.S. So if Kennedy Jr., RFK Jr., is directly threatening $722.5 billion in spend, and God knows how much in profit, that's quite a threat. That's quite a motivation to make RFK Jr. go away. And I'm not saying that's going to happen. I hope it doesn't. But I'm certainly not unaware that there's a huge, huge money and power. I mean, both, right? So there's a tremendous, he's up against a tremendous force. And it's a dark force, in my opinion, given the facts and the statistics we just went over. There's not a good angle to look at those. How do you look at millions of excess deaths over the past 5 years and put that in a positive light? How do you look at almost 3 in 4 of post-vaccination for the COVID virus, post-vaccination deaths were caused by the vaccine that was supposed to protect them? So there's just no other way to look at the pharmaceutical industry that is huge in politics, huge in the news industry, huge in people's lives, in the media. And the fact is that they have a lot to answer for, I think Robert Kennedy Jr. is trying to make them answer for it. And that extends into the CDC, where, FDA leaders and CDC leaders, they would switch chairs, right? One would go to the organization, the CDC, and then the FDA folks will go to the CDC, and back and forth and around. It's a little transformative. I'll take your job, you take my job. Way too close and too connected. So I think the FDA needs to be investigated. I think the FDA needs to go away as well. Whether it happens or not, we don't know, but the CDC is certainly not going to look like it was before, like it did before. And I think that's a good thing. It kind of goes right back to the Department of Education. When the Department of Education was founded in 1979, the U.S. education was ranked number 1 in the world. Now we're like number 30 or something, maybe worse than that. But there's no reason except for the fact that we have these overarching, highly powerful, highly politicized bureaucracies that undo and that destroy the foundations of our success and of our education and of our livelihoods and of our health. And that's what happened with the vaccination. That's what's happening with Big Pharma. They need to go away, in my opinion. And I hope Robert Kennedy Jr. is smart enough. I know he's a smart guy. I disagree with, probably most of his positions, but I'm okay with this one. So I hope he stays alive, stays healthy. And I'd like to see America de-vaxxed. And I'd like to see the folks who shove those vaccines on us and other vaccines that have apparently, or at least correlated with autism, they need to pay a price. Whether or not they do, I'm not overly optimistic, but I think we need to de-vax and cleanse America from our drug addiction, because we're the most drugged up people on the face of the earth, and we're not looking good health-wise, we're not looking good sports-wise, fitness-wise, intellectually. So we're just being fat, drugged, and sickened, and that's got to stop. So hey, that's my take on the de-vaxxing of America. Help build this channel, please. Subscribe, share, like, and comment, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.